So I'm Laura Kelton. Thank you for having me tonight. I've had the pleasure of joining in on a few of the Denver meetings recently, and I found this group to be very helpful for myself. So I'm really honored to be able to come and share with you today. I think that this is great because it's fulfilling for me. I feel like this is one of those interactions that I really miss about being, face to face in the hospitality industry, both with everything that's happened in the past year with COVID, and now kind of transitioning into a more administrative role in running support staff full time. So, kind of starting from the beginning of my, journey through the hospitality industry and how I ended up working with a group whose focus is mental health in the hospitality industry, very similar to what y'all are trying to accomplish through these meetings. So my first job in hospitality was working as a hostess at a Bonefish Grill. It was, the second job I ever had next to working seasonally at a Sephora. And I thought at that point in time that I was going to be a makeup artist for a living. I had studied theater in high school. That was kind of the one place that I feel like I really, fit in at that point in life, and kind of thought that I was going to go on and pursue that. And then the hospitality industry found me, for better or for worse. I like to think, at this point for better, because I'm here right now engaging with some really great people. And it's definitely not been without its ups and downs over the past 13 years now, 14 years. And, I think finding the hospitality industry, kind of similar to like theater, was one of the first places that I felt like I kind of fit in. I was born and raised in Louisiana, and then went to high school just outside of Memphis, Tennessee. So Memphis is where I had my first hosting job. But growing up in Louisiana, not only just like in the South, but I grew up in a very conservative Christian home. So going from, I was like homeschooled a lot growing up, went to some private Christian schools, and then moved to Memphis my freshman year of high school and went to public school for the first time. So definitely like a really, really big transition for me. And, with that came a whole new world of learning about all these things that I had been very sheltered from my entire life. So when I say, I found the hospitality industry and working in bars and restaurants, and I kind of felt accepted for the first time. Like I'd found this like new group of misfits who all were also trying to figure out life. And not so much that we had a lot in common, but that working in hospitality, they very much accepted me. And it was the first time that I felt like kind of cool and like I fit in, and people wanted me to come hang out with them and wanted to sneak this 18-year-old into bars with them. And, that was like that fun, glamorous part about that. When I was so young, I was like, this is super cool. But I also, in the job of hosting, found something that I felt really confident that I was very good at. It's funny because I grew up telling my mom that I never wanted to work in food service. And I don't know why. I do have like this very distinct memory of my mom early on in high school being like, oh, you should like wait tables. It's a great way to, put some cash in your pocket. I did it when I was in high school. And I was like, I never want to work in food service. Completely turned my nose up at it. And of course now, now I'm like, wow, I want to go kick my ass once upon a time, for feeling that way and really looking down on this industry, especially once I did find such a home. So I really, working in a restaurant, loved like the controlled chaos of it all. I also think that I joke that like all my years of growing up in the church really primed me for constant small talk, and kind of engaging with people of all different walks of life and trying to kind of please those people. I think that's another part of, my growing up that kind of fit into the model of a bar or a restaurant was the need to engage with people, to make them feel fulfilled. And that also plays into the negative aspects because you kind of sometimes let yourself fall by the wayside. There's also, a lot of growing up in a religious household that takes a toll on your mental health because it's not focused on. And a lot of it is very much like you pray about it. You go to church, you give that up to God. And so, mental health was not something that my parents talked about. I didn't know until probably I was at least in college that, for one, that my grandmother was an alcoholic. That was not anything that my mom had ever shared with me, even after I'd gotten into bartending as a career. I knew my parents weren't thrilled when I started to do that, but I never really understood why until they kind of, brought that up. But it wasn't until, yeah, much later in life that I, found out that my mom had suffered from anxiety, depression, and it really, I think for me was very enlightening because it taught me a lot about how I'd been raised and the things that like I had, missed all that time, but also kind of explained to me why I felt the way that I did, especially as I started to get older and, things like anxiety and depression really started to enter my life. But, so that was kind of, my upbringing. And then when I graduated high school, I moved to Chattanooga, Tennessee, to go to college. And it was my second day living there and went and applied at this, beautiful restaurant. I remember like walking in and there are these like, 30-foot ceilings and it's all black and white. And it was very glamorous. And I was like, I want to work here. Like this place is cool. And I got an interview and I got a job hosting there. And that is definitely, working there was something that completely changed my life. Again, for the good, for the bad. I think I learned a lot of lessons there because I started working there when I was 18 years old, and then I worked there for the next 6 years. So I really, really grew up, not only in my career, but just like as a human being in that restaurant. And it was, the first time that words like family kind of got thrown around in terms of talking about workplace atmosphere. And I had two people that I worked for that I, kind of worshiped to my own downfall. And kind of, and looking back at that working relationship over those 6 years, I learned a tremendous amount from them. But at the same time, I feel like I was part of a very, manipulative and toxic relationship. I absolutely became a workaholic, undoubtedly. I, worked to finish my degree in 3.5 years so that I could kind of focus full time on the restaurant. But I also did that while working full time at the restaurant and started to manage when I wasn't ready. We talked about me not managing until at least after I graduated school, and that didn't happen because we happened to, with a high turnover rate, lose someone in a management position before that. So I don't know, 20 years old, trying to manage people that were twice as old as I was. And it was hard. It was really difficult. I also, because I spent all of my time at work outside of school, my entire friendship circle was in that restaurant. And as I continued to kind of, elevate in ranks through the restaurant, I lost all my friends just by becoming their manager. Like literally, like my absolute closest best friends from high school that I even worked with. I kind of let that work relationship get in between my personal relationship with them. And I think that's when I started to kind of lose myself. And I say all of that, and we'll circle back to this, like later at the kind of end of my story where I am now. But I think that I'm just now starting to come back around to like honoring myself as a person again, which is really like, it's really crazy to put it in that, that kind of perspective. But, I worked there for 6 years, and I think it's so strange when I think about it now. The reason Melinda and I connected is because I spoke on a panel about like the guise of family in the restaurant industry and, the boundaries that people cross in doing that. And I think I learned a lot about how I didn't want to manage people. I knew I wanted to make a career out of food and beverage. And even at my like lowest point in that job, when I finally like felt depressed for the first time, like felt like I was hitting rock bottom, after I'd kind of, looked around, I'd lost my entire support system. My closest friend, who's still a dear friend now, wasn't living in the city anymore. And I just kind of realized, I was like, man, I felt very stuck. I felt stuck because I was like, I'm in a small town. There's no place for me to go. I want to go to a big city, and I want to go somewhere where like, I thought that like, because you worked at a restaurant in a big city, that like everyone actually really cared about their job. I was like, "Oh, I can't imagine like what it'd be like to live in Chicago and, work at a restaurant where everyone takes everything, seriously." Because I thought that that was part of the problem, was that I wasn't surrounded by people who were taking their career seriously, and that I wanted to be surrounded by people who didn't just like talking about food and drink, but were also like obsessed with it, like I was at that point. Because I had been, given all of these motivational markers that that was moving up in my career. Like that was my bosses were like, that's how you move up. Like you get better because you work all the time. Um, and I remember like driving home one night and the first time that I felt that low, and kind of, recalling that my best friend in high school, like finally understanding what she had gone through, because she had gone through a depressive phase after her parents had split up. And I just remember at that point, we weren't friends anymore. And I wanted to call her and be like, hey, I get it now. Like, I'm so sorry that I did not understand what you meant by like, you can't just snap out of it. You can't just put on a happy face. So I had, all these thoughts had kind of been brewing in my mind that I definitely wanted to leave. And it was, kind of a thing for me that I wanted to go and start over somewhere. So it's like, I want to go to a big city. I want to go, I felt like I didn't know enough to go start building my career, and that like I needed to go and be taught by someone all over again, because I taught myself how to bartend at that point. Sorry if I kind of like skipped all of that. In rising through the ranks, like no one else was doing craft cocktails in the city at that point. And I think that I ran myself ragged trying to like be the first and establish it, and, have all of these conversations about, what is Amaro, like what is Fernet Branca, what is Geneva, teaching people classic cocktails and things like that. And so I was like, I need to go start over. I need someone else to kind of teach me these things, because obviously all the studying I'd done for years clearly wasn't enough. And that summer I got accepted into the cocktail apprentice program with Tales of the Cocktail. This was 2014. And at that point I had already put in, my bosses had me under a contract. Like they knew, I think they could tell that I was ready to move on. And were getting frustrated and could see that. And so they had put me on like a year-long contract. And so I went in and put in like an 8-month notice with them, which is insane. All of this, like when I think back on it now, is really crazy to think about all of that, and in terms of like manipulation tactics that were kind of used. And, I remember when it was a chef owned and operated restaurant, and his wife had kind of overstepped, who was like our general manager, like overstepped my bounds within the bar. And I just went in that Monday morning and was like, I'm over it. That's it. Like, I'm putting in my notice. I know I can leave now and nothing is going to happen, because I know this contract like would not hold up. I was like, but it's not worth me like burning this bridge with you. Like I will stay, see it through, train someone up for you. Because, if there's something they had taught me to be loyal to them, not to be loyal to myself, but to be loyal to them, which is really hard. And I think for such a long time, and obviously even now when I still talk about it, felt the need to like gratify them for the accomplishments that I had made throughout my career. And a lot of that is stuff that I, even had heard after I had like left, was like, she doesn't give us any credit for like where she got in her career, which is like crazy, because now at that point, whenever I was thinking about like a family, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, your parents raised you, you should like be like, I am grateful that you raised me. Because that's, what I was taught to do. And now I think back on it and I'm like, no, that person employed you and that person helped you pay your bills. And like, yes, they taught you a lot, but you also became such a valuable asset to that company because you were passionate about this. So I really, was never giving myself enough credit for that. And kind of showing that, got into the cocktail apprentice program and went to Tales of the Cocktail that summer. And I guess at that point I was planning on leaving that fall anyways. And, this was something I talked about when we talk about, calling people family, was that I got involved with the CAP program and was like, oh, these are my people now. Like, their stories resonated with me. These were the people that it was like, all right, we're going to get up at, 5 or 6 a.m. every day after partying all night long. We're going to batch all these cocktails. We're going to go get treated like royalty afterwards. Like, granted, we got taken very good care of, but I kind of like left one toxic family and found another one. And that's not to say that anything negative about that program, because it's incredibly valuable. But it is also something that can be very dangerous when, you're talking about putting, especially a lot of really young people together. And, those days are fueled by a lot of Adderall, among other things, I'm sure. But it's, go, 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 no rest, no time to replenish yourself. And then you get a badge of honor for that at the end of the week. So for me, coming into that from a small market, I was like, oh, these are finally the people that like I'm talking about that take this as seriously as I do. Right. So I meet some people and decided to move to Chicago, which was great. And I did. And I ended up moving in with these two wonderful women that I was in the program with, that I'm very grateful are still my friends to this day. They've been my friends through all of it, through all the madness that all of us put ourselves through, put each other through. So, that's why I always say, like, throughout the journey, it's really cool to see all these building blocks that, kind of come together for you. So I moved to Chicago and just work a ton, start working at a new cocktail bar that Bordel that had opened up in Wicker Park. That was like this like dungeon, like layer, like upstairs, burlesque, unlike anything you would ever find in Chattanooga, Tennessee, for sure. But it's the first time that I could drink behind a bar. So we were taking shots of like Knob Creek 120 behind the bar regularly. And that, I think about some of the shifts I had there and I'm like, how did you survive? B, like, how'd you make any money? How'd you not get fired? And then I realized that was just part of the lifestyle that would come with it. And that it was, it was a place for people and owners to go and party hard with all of their friends. And then leave us to kind of, clean up the mess. So, I was doing that, working a ton, definitely learning a lot in terms of like speed bartending for the first time, like working any kind of like real volume, learning craft cocktails, working in any kind of like actual nightlife. I'd only worked in restaurant bars up to that point. But I knew that wasn't going to be the thing for me either. I'm like, this isn't where I see myself forever. And that's when I, reached out to the guys that own Sportsman's Club. And they were opening another spot down the street from where I was working at that point. And so I went to go interview and they were like, well, do you want to come work at Sportsman's? I didn't know that was on the table. I would love to work at Sportsman's. So I signed on to do that and, started there one day a week. And in the meantime, worked at a couple of other spots with the same company, helped them open some other bars, opened, Bad Hunter with them, Queen Mary. But all the meantime, I kind of, kept Sportsman's Club there as my one day a week. And then the opportunity came to be the general manager. And I was like, absolutely. So I signed up for that. And, it's really weird to try to, think about it now because I feel like that was like the heyday of my career, that seemed to be when everything was on an upwards trajectory. I'd worked a little bit as a brand ambassador for the Bon Vivants. And like, that was a really cool thing. Working at Sportsman's was like the place that there's like a waiting list to work there. Like everyone wants to work there. It's the spot that everyone in the industry goes after their shift. Chefs, bartenders, servers, line cooks, like every single person. Like at like clockwork, I could tell you who was going to walk in at 1 a.m. on a Tuesday night after the restaurant closed. And it was really, really cool. But because of that experience of working in that kind of it was like a neighborhood bar for the bar industry, for the bar and restaurant industry, I should say. And there's a lot of really wonderful things that come with that and a lot of really fantastic relationships. But it also came with a lot of like heaviness and a lot of weight and a lot of watching people drink themselves to death and abuse substances. And that includes us, on our shifts. I sent a picture to my friend the other day of us, me like hugging him at the bar. And I'm like, I really miss seeing you at the bar, but I don't miss being completely trashed at the end of my shift, trying to say goodbye to everyone, trying to count money, all those things. And when I was working there, this kind of, leads into not just my journey with mental health, but also kind of the initial foundation of support staff. We lost one of our regulars to suicide when I was working there. And I had served him a couple weeks before that, and knew that he was on a bender, like knew things weren't good with him. And he had just gotten fired from a job. And, when I got the news, it was one of those things where I had a very hard time processing and figuring out, like, I know we could have done better. How could we have done better? Like, what was appropriate for me to have said in that moment? What's not appropriate? How do I intervene? And at this point, I'm thinking, like, how do I intervene with my guests? And I'm like, when you're making your money off of pouring people poison for a living, like, how do you look at someone and say, hey, maybe not, like, maybe you're not okay. Maybe you actually need to seek, help. Can I help you find that help? When, your bosses are like, you can't do that. Like, that ruins our business model. So when that happened, I started volunteering with an organization called Hope for the Day, that was located in Chicago, that did preventative, proactive education in terms of suicide prevention. So that was kind of, how I initially got started with them. I, unfortunately, over the course of my life, have lost a couple of people that were very close to me to suicide. And it's something that I've always been very comfortable discussing with people and kind of meeting them, where they're at in their mental health journey. But this was the first time that I saw it kind of have a ripple effect throughout our industry, and was like, man, we've got to do something. So I started, volunteering with them, trying to learn a little bit more about how to talk to people if they're in a bad place. So, I keep running Sportsman's. Me and two of my business partners started Small Talk Hospitality, kind of trying to start an events company, that never really landed because none of us really were happy in the jobs that we were at and weren't quite at a place to make that full-time jump over into that. But through Small Talk, we actually were able to kind of form support staff as an official group. And that happened again after losing yet another friend to suicide. And that time, that was one of the craziest and most intense experiences that I've witnessed. I'd never seen that much grief and pain in a group of people before. And seeing how intensely people were grieving and how they were grieving was really kind of the catalyst for us to start support staff and start taking mental health seriously. Because we were looking around and realizing not only do we have the resources to try to help intervene and help people find the help that they need, but I don't have the resources now to help my friends grieve, my friends process. So we started building support staff at that point as a program with Hope for the Day, kind of mostly focused on suicide prevention. And then, as we started to kind of grow and expand, we really wanted to look outside of just the issue of suicide and talk about the contributing factors. So that's kind of, what led us to what we're doing now with support staff. I ended up leaving Sportsman's after I completely ran myself into the ground. I look back at pictures from that time and I'm like, oh my God, you were so skinny, because I was literally surviving on, I would walk home from work, I would go to CVS, I would get mostly junk food. And I was surviving on just junk food and Adderall for a couple of years, probably, especially that last year. And I'm a shell of a human being. I've got work going on, and then I would come and work on small talk stuff or come and work on support staff stuff. And it's a really like crazy dichotomy to think about the fact that like I was sitting there working on those mental health issues while also very much abusing my own mind and body. So I left that and went into sales for a while for a distributor. Not for me. Another thing that really, did not help with my mental health, really exacerbated a lot of issues of anxiety for me. It's just a very stressful environment. So I left that and went to open a restaurant, January 2020. And we, felt incredibly lucky to have found a group of people who wanted to run a restaurant similarly to the way that I did. And that was putting the staff first and putting people's mental health first and their safety. And we had some really incredible, policies in place. We had incredible employees. And then we got shut down last March. And now they have, at this point closed for good. And the past year has been incredibly hard, kind of thinking about, and as I'm sure most people have, kind of like what could have been, and like really feeling like we kind of got robbed of an opportunity to do it right. And I don't know if and when I'll have a chance to go back and do that again now that I've kind of transitioned into working in the mental health realm full time. All of that to say, there's a whole lot of talking about me, that, I think that organizations like this are so important. And, it's not something that I think people build for their own egos, but it's what they build for themselves when they're struggling and need a support system. So as much as I sit here and encourage people and say, like, you should go to therapy, therapy is good for you. It's okay to ask for help. I today, finally, after I've probably tried to start going to therapy 5 or 6 times at this point. And by that, I mean, I get to the contact page and then I maybe have sent an email a couple of times, and then maybe I've not filled out the questionnaire, and then I did one time, but I finally have my first like consultation, because it's one of those things that, if something I've learned in the past year, it's that you kind of do have the ability to control your own destiny. And we kind of have to make what we can of our own lives at this point. And I feel like I've always thought that I had a good grip on my anxiety because I knew it was there. And I'm starting to realize that I need to relinquish a lot of my control freak nature and try to allow someone else to come in and help me. So even when you think people have it all together, they don't. And I'm really glad that I have spaces like this and people like this that encourage me to go and ask for help. So thank you for listening to me ramble on forever. And thank you, for everything that y'all are doing to be here and to support your community. It's incredibly important.